This week, Antranig Vartanian, CEO at Alluria, joins us to discuss defending public infrastructure while at war, literal war stories, and how he helped Armenia defend infrastructure during a conflict. In the security news, you should just read the NIST CSF, JTAG hacking the original Xbox, tricked into sharing your password, attacking power management software, the vulnerability is in the SDK, tearing apart printers to find vulnerabilities, a pain in the NAS, URL-lib.parse is vulnerable, hacking the subway, again, how not to implement encryption from OSDP, Intel does a good job with security, and hacking card shuffling machines. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly. This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. SOC analysts are often overworked and underappreciated. In fact, many consider leaving their jobs or changing careers altogether. Devo is hosting the third annual SOC Analyst Appreciation Day to pay some long overdue kudos to analysts and encourage organizations to improve their job satisfaction and mental well-being. Join Devo and other cybersecurity industry professionals on October 18th for sessions and panels focused on de-stressing, SOC career development, and more. Visit securityweekly.com/Devo to register.
And welcome to the show. But first, let me introduce you to a man who just learned how pirates work together before the internet. Peer-to-peer networking, Mr. Paul Sidoria.
Welcome, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly, coming to you in super low definition, compliments of Darth Vader himself. It's episode number 795, being recorded on August 16th, 2023, right here in G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island. To my left, Mr. Larry Pesce is here with us.
Hey.
What's up, man?
Back in studio. Escaped Black Hat DEF CON.
That's right.
COVID. Knock on wood.
I know, I missed you. We need to spend more time together. You got stuck in traffic, and I had like a million questions for you, and then we had to start the show. So.
Yep. Unlikely to happen after the show because we got to get home to family.
That's true.
So
yes, I was fully aware of that.
We'll spend some time.
We'll spend some time together. Yeah. It's all good stuff that Larry and I are. I'm trying to figure out, is stuff old, or is it new, or is it the new old?
Yeah, or is the old new?
Is the old new, right? It all stemmed from me getting a Flipper Zero, and it's been spiraling.
Downhill from
it's spiraling from there. Maybe some of it is downhill. Mr. Josh Marpet is here with us. Josh, welcome.
Oh, so good to be back after vacation. I did not go to Black Hat DEF CON either. We went to the beach and avoided the Black Hat DEF CON COVID case of doom. Apparently the tracker's up to over 150 right now of officially publicly reported cases. So yeah, very happy I didn't go.
Which is, that's if it's 150 and there was 30,000 people?
150 that have self-reported.
Self-reported. Oh, so you're saying you could extrapolate that to a lot more?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
I gotcha.
Yeah.
Someone should do the math. Mr. Jeff Mann, welcome to the show.
I was in Vegas and I tested negative, but I keep hearing people that I was hanging out with in very close quarters dropping. So I attribute it to the bourbon and cigars, frankly.
That's what that's my philosophy, Jeff. You know that.
Yep. And if old is new, I'm a baby.
You can attend InfoSec World 2023 at Disney's Coronado Springs Resort September 23rd through the 28th. Listeners receive a 20% discount when you're registering using the code ISW23-SecWeek20 at securityweekly.com/InfoSec World 2023. Make sure you subscribe to the Below the Surface podcast by Eclipsium in partnership with CRA. Myself and Scott Schefferman host the show. We've had the pleasure of speaking with some amazing guests, Zeno Kova, Richard Hughes, and more. You can find all of the episodes at eclipsium.com/podcast. There hasn't been a new episode in a little bit of time, but we're starting recording back up for like season 2, if you will, if you want to borrow from the TV analogy, starting up here in September, where we've got a full docket of shows that we'll be doing, featuring both internal guests, by internal I mean from Eclipsium, and external guests as well. So I'm super excited about that. Antranig started his career 10 years ago as a systems administrator and part-time OS developer, and transitioned to become the only security engineer at Armenia's National Computer Emergency Response Team, where responsibilities included detecting active bots, botnets, vulnerable servers, and informing the public and private sector about security exposures. Antranig serves as the CEO of Alluria, a cyber deception company aimed at making deception the next standard in InfoSec. Antranig, welcome back to the show.
Good day, Uncle Paul. How are you?
I am doing well,
Uncle
my friend.
Paul.
Well,
Wow.
because it's the Armenian thing. We're like, we're brothers from another mother. Antranig is live from Armenia right now, which is my home country, which I've not yet visited. And Antranig and my friends over there are working to change that every day. I will make it out there at some point. So
Absolutely. And someone who's living in August 17, I can tell you the future is pretty much the same.
yes, that's right. That's right.
Nice.
So, Antranig, it's wonderful to have you on the show, have you back on the show. You've been on at least once, maybe twice before. And largely because, well, if you're Armenian, you can come on the show. It's totally fine. But you're here to talk about specifically our topic that we're doing for this 2-month block, which has been on incident response. And as listeners may know, we've done a few interviews and focused really on the topic of incident response. Antranig and I caught up. This has actually been a long time in the making. I think Antranig and I talked, and then I said, you're going to be in the incident response block that got here. And the story is very, very interesting for a lot of reasons. But I'd like you to start, Antranig, because I think not everyone, in fact, most people are not usually familiar with the geopolitical landscape that affects Armenia.
Well, and by people, Paul, you mean people in the United States?
Yeah, I would say, people in the United States. I mean, some of that is, there's a lot of blame to pass around, right? Some of it is what the mainstream media decides to cover and what not to cover, right? But I think it's important that you, Antranig, paint the picture of this political landscape that led up to the 2020 conflict with Azerbaijan.
Right. So, Paul, thank you very much for having me, and everyone else, thank you for inviting me again. I thought about writing this as like a very long blog post, and I'm like, this is getting way too long. How about I just talk about it? That would become much easier. So to point the political landscape of what happened is in the 90s, right after the destruction of the Soviet Union, there were a lot of new republics. Two of these were Armenia and Azerbaijan, two countries that got their independence. But there was what you would call, I think, the legal term would be a disputed area, which is also known as the Republic of Nagorno-Karabakh. Very beautiful place, lots of multicultural landscapes. It's one of the most beautiful places on the planet. And Karabakh has a very interesting story there, that in that region, both people lived there, both Armenians and Azerbaijanis. Although, over the years, the population would vary. At some point, it would be more Azerbaijanis, at some point, it would be more Armenians. And in the 90s, a war broke off, basically.
It's basically like a lot of wars or conflicts. It's based on a property dispute. Like, you might have a property dispute with your neighbor, but this country's having a property dispute.
Exactly. And a multi-year war broke off. The war ended up in having some kind of borders handled as in, this is our borders, this is yours. And you would say that from an international acceptance point of view, I think 18% of Azerbaijan's lands were actually being run by the independent Republic of Karabakh, and Armenia obviously provided the defense for the Karabakh Republic, and that went on for years. We had a small 4-day war in 2016 that it wasn't also much in the news. However, the 4-day war was, it was very fast. It happened like this. We didn't even feel what happened there. But from a cyber perspective, I was already working at the Computer Emergency Response Team of Armenia, and we were seeing the types of attack that are coming to either on government agencies, the increase in botnets. People's computers. Armenia is very famous for cracking software. We have basically no legal anything nothing here. Crack your Windows or your Photoshops, and there's nothing to enforce you. So everyone had a botnet in their computer one way or another. So those botnets became active, and that's what happened in 2016. But the dangerous part was in September 27th of 2020, so right after COVID was a global thing, and the whole planet is talking about COVID, which is a problem of its own, and then we have a war in 2020, and that went on for 44 days until until November the 9th.
Antranig, what changed in September? Just general frustrations, or I'm sure there's events that led up to it, right? You don't have to go into like excruciating detail, but I'm sure events transpired that led up to the actual conflict, right?
Well, Paul, that I'm also, part Syrian. So the Syrian inside of me would say that at some point in time when you live in kind of a non-democratic environment, someone wants to blame something on some other people. We've seen happen in world wars, and we've seen happen this in small countries like Armenia. So, unfortunately, from an Armenian perspective, what we feel like is that the war is a feed. It's some kind of something that they have to feed the public in Azerbaijan. Unfortunately, that hey, like this is your common enemy, right? Not the problems that you have inside the country, which is actually kind of true because I have friends who are in Azerbaijan. The countries might have borders, but the internet does not. Open source projects do not, and I talk with my friends, and they have these kind of problems, obviously. And from Armenia's perspective, it was in a very weird place. We had a revolution in 2018 that we're very proud of. I think I added on my CV, did the revolution in my skills, so that's very good to have in there, just in case. So, did the revolution, it became way more democratic. The country is in a lot better place economically, socially, etc. Yerevan just became one of the top 10 safest cities in the world, top 10 safest capitals, etc. So we were in a good place, but also in a mixed place, like, different government, etc. So I feel like there was a place for war. Like, we are not as organized at the moment because it's a different government and everything. So it kind of led up to that.
Gotcha.
And we've known that, they were prepared because we were like watching flights going back and forth, military aircrafts going to Azerbaijan for, preparement of war. We've seen this also happen in 2016. We learned the lesson of watching these kind of things. But we were not prepared. And my personal story there is that on the 27th of September, we were actually doing an Armenian CTF. We're very famous for running CTFs in Armenia and bug bounty programs, and we were literally in the middle of a CTF when we woke up in the morning and we saw the news, and apparently there was a war that got broke off, and we realized from the news and by talking to our friends in the borders, we have friends who are soldiers, that this is not a regular Wednesday. This is going to be an actual war.
Yeah, you quickly transitioned from an exercise to an actual incident.
Yes. So I wanted to share our experience there. And to be clear, everything that we've done during that 44-day and post that was all voluntary based. Like, none of us are government contractors. None of us are companies. We are just all people in the community of tech that we're trying to do our best. And I want to share that story because I hope it would be useful for someone else. Because I know that, in the US, there's like big budgets and government contractors, but the majority of the countries are not big, right? The majority of countries, they don't have big budgets. And if something bad happens, I hope that their communities can help them out. So the interesting thing that we learned right after the morning is that I woke up, because I slept in the morning to fix the CTF servers, and I woke up at the middle of the day to see that hundreds of people have texted me that they're like, what can we do? Like, everyone was asking, like, what can we do? And none of them are in InfoSec. You have to understand that. Like, everyone is in tech, but none of them is in InfoSec. You have programmers, software engineers, sysadmins, designers, and the list goes on. Data analysts, right? And like, what can we do?
Trinik, when the conflict broke out, what were the first indicators? Was it of the physical battle, or was it of the cyber nature, or was it a coordinated strike?
It was completely coordinated, by the way. There is a very good report that got published a couple of weeks ago at Citizen Lab
Yeah.
About Armenia, Azerbaijan, and how Pegasus was used in Armenia. I was one of the first people actually who found Pegasus at one of the government officials back in 2017.
The NSO
or
program, Pegasus?
18.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Oh boy.
And way before they even used Pegasus, before they used the typical Windows malware on government officials, when we were running the CERT, we were one of the earliest people to find these things. And for us, we realized that this is organized because as soon as we called our sysadmin friends in the government, they're like, yeah, everything is down. Like the websites are down. There is a big traffic coming in, all organized. Whatever systems that we had vulnerable that we didn't have time to update, they figured that out. They got in, and the list goes on, basically, from government to higher education to anything attached to the government, right? Like the NGOs that work. So it was purely organized, and we realized this is either going to be like the 4-day thing back in 2016, like it's not going to be a regular Wednesday, or it might even go longer if it doesn't end up in a week. So that first week was very stressful, to be honest.
Antranig, do you have a sense of how long they were planning and implanting to conduct the cybersecurity attacks? Like how far, when do you think they started going, oh, we got to map this and we got to find this, but we're not going to do any damage until like this day?
So we actually did a research on that back in 2016 when the war started. We talked with multiple organizations out there, like Shadow Server. They share a lot of data with the certs, etc. And we started analyzing the data, like what can the data show us, right? And what we realized is before the war starts, the number of active bots, for example, and this is a very typical number, because the attacks that were happening inside, like the typical DDoS attacks that happens a lot, they were not coming from the outside, they were coming from the inside. They were not coming from like some random Chinese servers, they were coming from inside the country. And because inside the country is not a big traffic, we have 10 gigabit connections between the ISPs. You fill in that 10 gig and that's it. Now the internal traffic is just all filled in, right? And we've actually been working for the last couple of weeks to upgrade all of these systems to higher capacities. We start looking at the data, and the data shows that right before the war starts, you don't see like 10 or 20% of number of botnets or number of we've seen scenarios of, the botnet was always the most obvious, but the number of scans that were coming to the government from some specific number of servers that we know are run by other parties, right? So they were doing more scans, they were doing more, activating more botnets, and it wasn't like 10%, it was 3 times, 5 times more.
I see. That's like in the weeks leading up to the actual attack?
Actually, between 2 and 3 months.
Okay.
So this was a very long prepared thing. It was between 2 and 3 months. And we were not prepared. We were not prepared at all. And like I said, I'm straight Armenian, so my philosophy of peace is, if you want peace, be prepared for war. And we were not for any of those things. So we were not prepared for any of those, and the morning when we saw everything, it just all went down from in couple of dominoes. And from a media perspective, this becomes problematic. Is what do you know what's happening in your country when the Ministry of Defense's website is not loading? Right, so that becomes your major issues. Like if the Ministry of Defense website is not loading, you become really scared, and any kind of misinformation can be thrown out there on social media or whatever it is. So volunteers contact us out. They're like, how can we help out? And I say, I don't know. There is no playbook about this. No one wrote. I've never learned about this from YouTube videos or blog posts or anything. Like we're writing the playbook as we go. So in a kind of an organic way, what happened is regionally, by cities or parts of cities, volunteering groups started to show up. And this is all, done by the tech community, software engineers, data analysts, sysadmins, and the list goes on. People just, someone comes out and says, hey guys, I have a big office. maybe he has an IT team that outsource software. Let's gather up in my office, and people just gather up there and they try to figure out what to do.
Yeah. So you had you had to physically meet because communications outside of that are difficult. Yeah.
Yes. And I'll get into the communication because that was a whole other nightmare. So we start to physically meet, and I sit down there and I start thinking, okay, let's assume that Armenia is a company, not a country, and this company is under attack. I'm a security engineer. What should I do? Right? This is the typical thing that we start to think about, and we go, okay, what is our business perspective? Okay, provide service to the public. What's working and what's not? So the volunteers start to set up the most primitive ways of monitoring of what's working because we don't even know what's working.
Yeah.
So we go.
So I was going to ask that, Antranig, but I think that's an important point. Step one is figure out what's being attacked and what's not. Like where do we stand? Right, is the first step.
Yes,
that's fair.
And we didn't know, so we went into the top 10, the top 100 Armenian websites, and these were both very important private companies. Like think of the Uber of Armenia, right? Or the food deliveries here, to the government websites. The Ministry of Defense, financials. The stock market, you had things like the pension fund. These are things that people use on day-to-day basis. So we have to understand what's working and what's not. So I'm like, hey, who knows how to set up a monitoring system? Just ping something and show it to the dashboard if it's working fine. Send an HTTP request and tell me if it's 200 or not. Basic things. So group of young people come out and they're like, we'll do it. We'll do it right now. So again, volunteering. So some random person shouts that I have a server. I can give you a server. I'm like, okay, great. Let's do that.
Yeah. So, raise your hand if you have a server and you know how to configure Nagios.
Exactly.
Go.
Exactly. Exactly. So the kids sit down. They set up the server like in an hour or two. They do that. Amazing. We give them the list of the websites. We help them to tune it a little bit. And like half an hour in, it shows that everything is down. And I get worried. I'm like, is it that bad? What's happening? And luckily I was one of the very few lucky people who I've been in touch with the government before. That would be either the DoD or the Ministry of Defense that we call, or the National Security Agency, or any other type of people that we've been in touch with over the years in the conferences, in the communities. So we've talked with these people. We know who they are. So I start calling them. I'm like, is everything down or is my system not working properly? They're like, what are you doing? I'm like, we're trying to monitor to see if something is down. And they tell me, 1 sec, I'll call you right back. I'm like, okay, great. And he calls me a second later and he says, what's your IP of your server? I give him the IP of my server and he says, all right, we blacklisted you by accident. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, yeah, because you've been doing, pinging.
Oh, he's pinging, yeah. So they thought the monitoring was
the automated firewall is just blocking you. I'm like, oh my God. So lesson number 2, have a point of contact with the government and tell them what you're doing. So that was like the second day, and every volunteering organization had a hierarchy at that point. We have like the sysadmins, the developers, the data analysts, and the manager of that volunteering group talks to the regional volunteering group's manager, talks to the government. So now we have a point of contact. We tell the government and the agencies how we are trying to help them, and they confirm if that's a good amount of help or not. So in this case, they're like, monitoring, and you have the list and everything is ready. I'm going to unblock you right now and give me access to that system. Right? They're like, okay, let's have access to that.
So it's interesting, Antranig, you're organizing like anyone who works in technology, volunteer and like drop everything and help with this effort right now.
Yes.
It's a cyber militia.
Yeah. It's very it's a good term.
Yeah. Yes.
Yep.
Yes. And
it's also fascinating that you say when your government's being attacked and you want to organize a volunteer militia, make sure you have a contact in the government and out of band communication. I mean, we talk about command and control in cyber, but it has older origins.
Yeah,
that term
for sure.
I'm sorry. Continue.
And that's absolutely true. And one of the problems with our old design of the government was that the government never had like a CERT or something like that, right? Every branch of the government was responsible for its own. Every agency were responsible for their own. So it was in a very weird place, So we wanted to kind of not unite it, but rather be a community that just exchanges the information properly. And that part was fun.
Antranig, did you ever talk to the Estonians, considering they have an Estonian cyber militia and have done similar things?
I want to say no comment.
Pineapple.
That's fine.
Okay, sounds good.
We have a safe word.
So, Antranig, we're at the point where you're under attack. You've organized what Jeff has termed, and I like, the cyber militia. Yes. You have communications channels to the government, which is extremely important to establish these communication channels, especially with the government. Now you know what's down in this use. You've been on blacklisted. Now you know what's up and what's down. Now I'm assuming the next step is a prioritization and then executing actions to remediate and bring systems back up, correct?
Yeah. So at the same time, we learned two things at the next step, which is, number one, crash courses are very useful. While our volunteering team was doing all of this monitoring and exercise, the other volunteering team, who were, penetration testers by profession, which is not a lot of them in Armenia, what they were doing is they were calling every software engineer, backend, frontend, whatever it is, and every day they would do a crash course of 8 to 10 hours with 20 people. Every day with 20 people for 8 to 10 hours. And the idea was, this is the OWASP top 10. Here's an example of an attack. Here's why the attack happened. Here's how to fix the attack. Here's what it looks like in the source code. Here's why that attack happened. Here's some database issues. Here's what XSRF looks like. Here's how you can configure the basics of the firewall. Very, very basic things. So like a software engineer is now becoming security aware.
You did that through training, because it's not everyone's instinct to go, wow, we have a huge incident going on, to grossly understate what is happening for an entire country. Yeah. The next step is, let's take the time to train some people up. It's usually not where people go. But you seem to do this effectively in this particular scenario by taking cybersecurity experts, pairing them with software developers, and going like, look, this is what attacks look like. When this training's done, your job now begins. Apply what you learn so our websites don't get hacked, basically. Right? That's what's happening.
Exactly. And this was not even my idea, by the way. Like, this is just, the other the volunteering group, they just called me up and they said, hey, I think, I'm not sure, but I think we have 20 people ready for you. Like, they might be able to fix some websites. Do you want that? I'm like, of course we do.
Yeah.
So so as soon as some kind of a website went down, we already, thanks to the government, we had some kind of a contact list. Like, hey, if this domain goes down or this IP range is not accessible, this is the phone number you should call, right? This is Jack from X organization. Give him a call. He'll let you know if they're resetting something or if there's something bad happening. Let's help them out. So, and 80 to 90% of the times, they didn't have the physical capacity. And this is when I realized, pay good money to sysadmins. Pay good money to sysadmins. Sysadmins are very important. They are very, very important. And unfortunately, it's not valued. You just change the title to DevOps, and now they're earning, thrice the money, which is kind of very sad. But that was the reality of it. They were, sysadmins in government agencies. They didn't earn a lot of money. They were always shutting down fires instead of fixing things. So it was very, very sad there. But what ended up happening is, now we had our sysadmins who were, DevOpsy, or, they were software engineers. We taught them couple of things, and now we call Jacks from agency X, and we tell them, hey Jack, looks like they're having firewall issues, can we send someone? They're like, yes, send someone right now. We have like 8 Cisco switches that need to be reset and updated. I'm like, okay, great. 2 people going physically there right now. And that was the operation. And, people, Paul, Armenians, the diaspora loves to donate money. So they'd be like, can we give you money for the taxis? Or can we give you the money for, for your day-to-day expenses there, So, we did our best. They did our best. And
but you have to
go physically there.
you're talking on a countrywide scale, but even across an enterprise, I think one of the things that's super important is to have the landscape down. Like you said, you know where the assets are, you know who's responsible for those assets is step one, but then also knowing who has what skills. So you mentioned there's 8 Cisco switches that need updating, configuration updates.
Yes.
Now you got to know who can go there. It doesn't have to look at the manual to go. Because myself, Antranig, any one of us, right, could probably go and we'd eventually figure it out. But if we haven't touched a Cisco switch in 5+ years, you want the person that goes, oh, I did this last week and can just go do it, correct?
Yeah. Yeah. So I actually missed that point. So where volunteers were joining, one of the things that we did, because we didn't trust anything online at that point, is we literally had a notepad and going okay, Paula Sadurian works at company X or unemployed or has the skills of JavaScript, Docker, Cisco switches, blah, blah, blah. So we had a list of people who were capable of solving problems and the people who had the problems. So you just you're matching them. I think that would be a good idea for an app. That would be a great idea for an app. I just realized that. So, or
you could do it in Excel.
But matchmaking, or in Excel. So that was one of the first things that we did, obviously, and it worked very well. And the software engineers did the same. So, if a website got defaced, that's very common during war to deface things and put the flag of some, So if a website got defaced, we would send software engineers. Now they know what vulnerabilities look like, how to do a little bit of software forensics, and they would sit down and fix that PHP code, that Node.js code, and rerun the website in a clean state, and now it would be all up and running. So
Antranig, were you doing the prioritization of what should be fixed, or because I'm assuming there's
I'm a horrible person for that. So just to be clear,
I gotcha.
Me and prioritization don't go very well. I would sit down and write.
Honest.
Yeah. Because
that was
Jeff.
a question I had earlier was, who was in charge of all this? Related to that, we're using sort of this circular analogy between between organizations and country. Ordinarily, an organization would do some sort of background checks and vettings of the people that they're hiring. Was there any kind of vetting that was done of the volunteers? Did you have concerns of, the adversaries doing even more damage by volunteering to help?
Yes, and I'll go one by one. For the organizational chart, it went regional volunteers and their managers. And then up top is any point of contact within the government. So before we do anything that we think should be done, we ask them first. Because in the first week, it happened at least multiple times that either 2 volunteering groups who were not aware of each other yet, they were trying to fix the same problem.
Yeah.
Or 2 government agencies were trying to solve the same problem. So then the government agencies try to have a layer of communications, and then they push it down to us. And we don't have clearance, obviously. So we would go that we want to do this. Do you approve or not? And in some cases, they would say things like, yes, please do that and let us know how it goes. Or they would say, this is not a high priority, but if you have the resources, do it. Or they would say, this is not important at all. That is, let's say, a legacy website. This is a good idea to shut it down right now. So it would go either way. So that would be the managerial way there. And it was all about communication. It was all about, texting, chatting, calling, and see what the situation is at the time. But in the first week, we definitely had problems where we had problems where multiple people were solving the same problem, and it wasn't very productive. But your second point was very good, because I think we were the second week in, and we realized one of our private, quote unquote, private servers, this is only used internally, is monitoring only internal things, got leaked, and now it's under attack. So I'm like, how did this even happen? Who even got that IP address? Whoever set it up, they did their best to not leak that there is an external page there. So from an outside world, this looks like a regular Linux box that you can only ping. There is nothing running on it. But somehow someone figured out that this is a Linux box that's doing monitoring for 200 websites. How did that happen? So like either there's a leak, as you know, it's war, so having a traitor is not uncommon, or the more obvious answer would be one of the volunteers is hacked. Their Telegram messenger is hacked, their computer is hacked.
How do you know if you have a spy, for lack of a better term, or traitor, or if someone who is doing what they're supposed to be genuine?
We're using the analogy, Paul. It's the insider problem.
The insider problem, yeah.
It is the insider
or they
problem.
hacked, which is, I mean, when you have an insider threat, you're wondering, is that person the threat, or is it just their machine was compromised and their machine is really the threat and it's an external threat actor? Yeah.
So at that point, I brought my mentors who taught me Unix, and I'm like, forensics on every computer. We're going down right now, and we found some machines who were, they had cracked software, obviously, some Windows machines, and they were running some botnet, but we didn't know if that was the right botnet or not. But we ended up giving to the volunteers, stuff like USB sticks where they would have something like Cubes OS or Tails or any fresh operating system, even like a regular Ubuntu would do, just as long as it's fresh. So we ended up setting up stuff like that just to be safe, kind of. But the vetting problem was harder. So, people don't actually know a lot about this, but there's this like the Apple development model where like the Bluetooth team is working on something that they don't know what it's for, and then the audio team is working on something that they don't know what it's for. Turns out it's about Bluetooth audio, but the teams themselves are not aware of that, right? So like you have to see the big picture to understand of what's happening in there, basically. And we started applying that methodology, for lack of a better term. We ended up, because it organically happened in a way that the people who were the managers, I want to say, of these volunteering groups were vetted by the government at some point in time. Like I was vetted because I was running the CERT, and the other volunteers were vetted because, let's say, they had contracts with the government over the years, the pen testers, etc. So it kind of ended up happening like that. Like the government trusted us, but then we started like, okay, let's divide the tasks in a way that the volunteers themselves might not know exactly why is this for, but with a bigger picture it would be a lot more clear, right? And this happened only in very case by cases. It wasn't like for everyday thing, right?
Jeff, I think that's a page out of history of warfare and conflict as well, right?
Well, yeah, I mean that's compartmentalization. Yeah, that's the need to know.
Yeah,
you do this. You don't need to know what this is going to do.
Yeah, but doing that at wartime and with volunteers, that was really tough because, like, there was this, I want to say, an intern of a sysadmin, and she's looking at me like, I know how to do that. I've done that, but I don't know why am I doing that if these three other components aren't there. I'm like, no, don't worry, just set it up on this machine, and these are all the access that you need to know, and just do it that way, and I'm gonna be back in an hour. So then I go to talk with the other team, and like this is what's going there. And it was very hard, obviously, because people want to help and they don't know why are we doing this, because they don't know that they're hacked or someone else got hacked, right? We're doing the monitoring as best as we can. So the volunteers were not pissed, I want to say, but they were just confused. The right term would be, right? They didn't understand of what's happening. So that's how the vetting, and that's a very good question. Vetting is hard, although it is a small country. Like everyone, like you, this is a safe country because if you go outside to mug someone, it would be your uncle. It's not hard to vet someone in here, basically. So yeah. That's
Antranig,
how we did it on that side.
I want to ask, you mentioned there's a lot of cracked software, and are we talking about that being a threat the same way cracked software was a threat in the 90s when we used to download cracked software and it had backdoors in it? I mean,
wait.
Probably go back to 80s, right?
Paul, I got to tell you that in the 90s and in the 80s, 95% of the cracked Windows copies came from Armenia.
Oh,
okay. Armenia was the world leader in supplier of cracked software to the rest of the world.
Interesting.
So, Antranig, I apologize, but it's the truth.
I think we should be proud of that.
Yeah, as like an Armenian, I'm kind of proud of that. I'm kind of proud of that too. Yeah, that works.
Yeah, we've got hackers. So actually, there's a very funny story. Do you guys remember that? I mean, my friends don't, but there was like you wouldn't steal a car. The advertisement by I think it was Microsoft. So in 2003. And this is, completely off topic. Microsoft comes to Armenia and brings all these Windows sysadmins, and they tell them like, don't buy cracked software, buy licensed software, etc., etc. And the analogy that they bring in, I mean, this is a post-Soviet country. The analogy that they bring in is like, you wouldn't steal a car, right? Like you wouldn't steal a car. And I wasn't there. Maybe I was like 10 years old at the time. So this is like a story that's coming from my mentor, but it's a legendary story of our times that Microsoft, goes like, you wouldn't steal a car, and you would buy a car, right? And someone in the audience shouts, "Can I buy a used license?" Because no one here drives a new car. Everyone drives a used car.
That's awesome.
I buy a used license? It's so expensive. So that's very, very Armenian of that to happen. So with the cracked software is a problem, and it's everywhere. Like it was in the government, it was in education, everywhere. But it got better over the years. They started understanding the value of, would you give us a deal? We have like 6,000 computers, so it became a lot better these days. That's what happened on the volunteering front, less or so. And then we did the compartment. We brought them into groups, and the pen testing crash course was epic. I couldn't believe my eyes that someone who's been a PHP engineer for like 3 years give them an 8-hour crash course on OWASP top 10, and now they can actually find bugs with their eye. This was just by reading the code. Like they would know this is a bad code just because you told them. The only lacking thing from them was just having the basic knowledge, and that was very good to know about that part. So that went on for a long time, I guess. And then I think it was the 4th week, something very bad happened, which was, and I don't know, do you guys remember this? That, in 2008, Armenia didn't have internet connection with the world because a grandmother in Georgia cut off the lines.
I remember that.
Shovel.
I remember that story, actually.
I remember this.
Yes.
I remember this.
A shovel. Anyway. So something similar happened.
Attenuation by grandma.
Yeah. So we, like 4th week, I guess, we had no internet connection. Well, people called it internet, but we had the internal net was working fine. We just couldn't connect to Telegram, Facebook, whatever it is. And at that point, my community was like, I guess Antranig was correct. Maybe self-hosting is a good idea. So there you go. Everyone, every agency, not every agency, but at least the major agencies start setting up things like a Matrix server, a Jabber server, stuff like that. And I heard about this after the war, that the federated services that were running physically inside the country, like the Jabber servers and the Matrix servers and even like Mastodon servers, they were actually, because deploying Mastodon is apparently easier than deploying Jabber, they were even deploying Mastodon as a communication device. That these federated services like Mastodon and Jabber literally saved lives in a situation where a general at the front line couldn't talk with the ministry back in the capital because there was no connection over Telegram and Signal and Viber, right? These are very common applications that they use, but they require to talk with their servers. But the federated services did not, because everything was inside the country. So apparently these federated services literally have saved lives to pass communication back and forth. And I was very happy to know that they use these open source protocols and projects in order to pass data back and forth. We would IRC.
We would tabletop that back in the day, and that obviously that those scenarios get tabletop today as well. And I think it's one of the most fundamental aspects of incident response is to say, if there is an incident, how do we communicate? Oh, we have an email list. Okay, well, what if our email server's down? Oh, okay, well, we use Slack. Okay, but what if our internet connection's down or Slack is down? what is the fallback communication system during an incident, right?
Carrier
And this has been tabletopped in multiple scenarios.
You were doing a lot over the phone line, so the phone lines, telecoms were not affected.
Telecoms were not affected. All of the SS7s internally were working fine, but they were not. We did not consider them to be secure at the time. We didn't know if they were in the telecom or not. The telecoms companies are very competent. There's nothing wrong in saying that they're really, really very good in their security. But just to be, just to be safe, we wanted an actual end-to-end secure channels, like just to be completely safe.
And I also know we've discussed in various scenarios for incident response over the years that Larry, you'll appreciate this, right? Like a ham radio is the I think one of the best fail safes when all other communications fail. Can we use RF transmissions to communicate with each other?
Yes.
And you can't. I mean, obviously, there's some limitations of planning. Go behind that. But
the problem with that, Paul, though, is those are still open lines of communication.
Correct.
They can
intercept. So what you really need is cryptography.
Jeff is speaking from experience and his background with this.
And that was exactly where I was going to go with this. Like a licensed operator here in the U.S., you can't encrypt your communications. You can encode your communications, but they're usually fairly easy to decode.
Yep.
But that said, I mean, we, being a prepper and having all of that type of mentality in the past, when there's lawlessness, there will be no one to enforce the laws.
Correct.
So do all the crypto you want over those open airwaves, right?
Well,
go ahead, Jeff.
I'm sorry. It's just it's important to me, at least, to note that encoding in telecom speak is not the same thing as encoding in cryptography.
Correct.
Yes.
Encoding is typically data compression, some sort of translation that is not not secret in any way. It's more like a language. You're usually doing it to shorten and compress data.
It's like data serialization in programming today. Which is a similar kind of concept that is not encryption, right?
Correct.
And so, but Antranig, you're talking about the same, like we're talking about ham radio communications. In your case, it was keeping up enough infrastructure so that you could have internal servers and services that would allow you to communicate securely.
Yes, and that I was very happy to know that it literally saved lives, and including Mastodon, including Jabber, and we actually thought about looking about radio, and I didn't know about this, that in the Armenian law there's the radio spectrum of what can be used, and there are actually channels reserved for private use. Like if you're broadcasting over, I think it's like 12-kilometer. Apology for my non-American. 12-kilometer radius is like, you can do whatever you want. You can, you can broadcast to cars in that if a car can handle that spectrum, or have your own encrypted channel. And there are also spectrums that are for the government for emergencies, like in case of war. So you would know that everyone should tune to that radio channel. In those kind of scenarios. So they have apparently very good laws that they copied from the Europeans over the years that I'm not sure if it's been used before, but I'm very happy to know that it's there. Our hackers community in Armenia right now is actually trying to find a way to do that. So to have multiple stations around the city that they would cover their area and see if we can mesh them together to broadcast the same thing. So
if we're gonna we're trying to talk about lessons for organizations, so it's good to make sure everybody knows everybody else's phone number.
Yeah.
Yes.
Make sure that there's a call tree. Make sure contact list, and also the contact list should have some sort of hierarchy to it. Some sort of organizational structure, so that you have some idea. I mean, I think you'll agree with me, but have some idea who's going to be in charge and calling the shots ahead of time. Most companies are not going to be like the equivalent of this is a nation state attack. So they're going to have the phone lines available. They may even have the internet available. But I think as important is making sure it's understood ahead of time who's going to call the shots, who's in charge. If you're getting a message from somebody to do something, make sure it's from the right person in terms of the hierarchy.
There's also mass notification platforms like ArmorText is one of them. I've worked with them before that are out of band communications for exactly the kind of situation you're talking about. And they're very, very popular in certain like financial institutions. It's huge because in the U.S., financial institutions have to log all their contacts. So was it Goldman Sachs that got fined $1 billion for WhatsApp or something like I forget. But there's a lot of ways to do this kind of thing. But at least Jeff, make sure everybody's got phone numbers, and I don't know what the text communication platform of choice in Armenia is, but make sure they've got WhatsApp or Telegram or whatever it is. Make sure everybody's got everybody's contact info.
Also, I think you got to make sure that you have power, right? We haven't touched on critical infrastructure, and I don't want you to comment in areas that you don't want to be commenting on or compromise security in any way. But obviously, we've all learned lessons from the Russia-Ukraine conflict, even before the current conflict of power stations being attacked, right? There's very, very famous, well-documented attacks. You had to be aware of that going in, Antranig. Was that something that changed after the conflict as well to further protect critical infrastructure? Because obviously all that stuff is in play when there's a conflict like this. There's no rules, right?
Yes. So that was actually very interesting because, first of all, even as the pen testing team, even myself, we didn't even think about that until a software engineer who worked a lot with embedded systems. He came to me and said, "Hey, I was doing a scan of the country and I realized that we have SCADA systems up and running on the internet without authentication." I'm like, "What?" I'm like, "I've heard of that. I've read about it. I've never had the chance to do things with it. But what are we talking about exactly?" And just like we had point of contacts with the government and agencies, we also had point of contacts with the telecoms in case of any kind of emergency. And we see like maybe half a dozen SCADA systems up and running, and we don't know what these things are. I've never seen these in real life to actually interact with them, but I read the protocol standard, I find some tools, I run something, and like, oh, okay, this is all completely open. Like we're talking SNMP version 2 style openness, like you can do whatever you want in here.
So you mean Modbus?
Great.
You mean Modbus?
Yes, Modbus. Modbus, yes. So it's like completely open. Okay, what can we do? And I contact the appropriate ISPs who have the IPs set there. And, we're talking apparently about a power block at some town somewhere. And if someone found this and had some evil ideas, they could shut down the power of that town, and it would be very dangerous. So we didn't know what to do, and we didn't know what even the law is. Like, can I talk with the DOD or the NSA and tell them to enforce, to shut down that IP address, to tell the ISP? And the ISP, the ISP is not like that they don't want to, but we don't know the legality of this, and we're not able to get in touch of the person responsible for that. And a couple of hours later, we found all of the people responsible, and they were, the situations were like, apologies, I didn't know when I was configuring this. If you have anyone to help us out, let's set up a call right now. From that to, I have no idea what this is. I'm just like a maintainer of this thing that, I got inherited by my previous person, responsible person. Can you shut it down? Like, you have my consent to shut this down from the internet. Just shut down the IP address. Don't bring that VLAN to my network. Just,
and good thing you folks found it before the enemy did.
Yes,
for sure.
Yes, and that was very, very. Good luck there. And we actually also had some good luck with the telecoms, because like one of the offices that we were sitting, one of the telecoms calls and says, guys, are you the people who are like scanning the country for security purposes? It was like, yes, we are. And they like, yeah, we can provide you, 10 gigabit access just for you to do things faster if you want. I'm like, oh, great, thank you, dear Telecom. So
you send that to my house next.
You're talking about privately owned Armenian companies. Like no one is gonna do anything. From a legal point of view, it's all good. From a patriotic point of view, it's all good. So this was all very good stuff that was being done. They were also volunteering their resources, so it was all
working with volunteers, though. Antranig, it's I think in an incident we need to be mindful that it's not everyday operations, right? Like
exactly.
The most important thing is the result. And you told a story of like someone who was struggling to set up a VPN and using Docker and all that stuff. I don't know if you want to tell that story, because I think it underscores the point that this is different from everyday operations. This is, you're responding to an incident, and the way you approach problems and solutions is slightly different.
Yes, I'll tell that story and then I'll go to the outcome directly. So the story was, we had a DevOps guy, let's put it that way, a cloud technologies guy, and we needed this was after the 4 weeks, so we realized we had internal infrastructure and we were automating a lot of stuff. So I'm like, no GitHub, TIA server, all local hosted, let's do this. So we start setting up these things, and we didn't have the philosophy of what do you call that? I think they call it zero trust architecture, right? Yeah. So we didn't have that philosophy. We're like, okay, that's VPN at least, because we didn't have a lot of Git TI users at the time. It's like just 10 developers working. Okay, let's set up the VPN, and I give the task to a DevOps guy that please set up a VPN, anything, WireGuard, OpenVPN, whatever it is, and so someone can access this Git server. And it's like, okay, and I'm running around, but like after 2 days, and I don't know it's 2 days because I didn't have any sleep. I see, and I'm like, is everything okay? Is the VPN? Did you send the configuration to the people? He's like, oh, I'm having some problem with Docker networking. I'm like, oh. So why are
Docker
you
networking
struggling with Docker networking? Of course, personally, this was perfect timing to do advertisement of free BSD but this is not the time for that. so I like
Docker and networking in the same sentence basically spells disaster. I can speak from experience. It is multiple days before you're like, oh, that's how I didn't think it should work, but that's how it's working. Okay.
Yeah, and by the way, I did to do like postmortems. The guy missed the privilege for tune tap interfaces. That's why his image wasn't working. So anyway, that happened, and I'm like, bring me the closest sysadmin, which apparently was my mentor, and I'm like, I need OpenVPN or WireGuard right now. And again, like this sysadmin is so undervalued. So 10 minutes later, he's like, here are 10 keys to connect to the server. I'm like, okay, it's done.
Because he did apt install WireGuard instead of
WireGuard,
trying to put it in a container.
Went to the official doc, copy, paste, done. Like it's such a weird mentality there. And I believe that that sysadmin, shortest path and not the scale path is perfect for these times of scenarios.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. As we close out, Antranig, what are the top 3 lessons learned from your experience, which is unique, certainly, but what are those roughly the top 3 lessons learned?
Number one, that this was a shocker for me. Anyone in tech can get into security really fast if they want to. So, they didn't do Udemy courses or, read a lot of books. And I'm not saying that these are bad things. These are absolutely good things. But apparently an 8-hour crash course is an awesome thing for anyone to do. Just do any kind of an 8-hour crash course on security if you're a developer or sysadmin. And just like the level from 0 to 10 is really, really a lot more important than from the 10 to the 90. Like if you got from the 0 to 10, that's really hard. Like imagine having $0 and the next day you have like $1,000, right? It's a lot bigger of a difference than from going from 1,000 to 10,000. Like that $1,000 can do a lot if the day before that you had 0.
Right.
That knowledge is amazing.
Yeah, I got you.
So that was one thing that we learned. The second thing that we learned is that even though people like convenience, that's why they use things like Telegram and Viber and WhatsApp and whatever it is. Always have on a government level the backup communications self-hosted on an infrastructure that you can control. And the you can control is very important, because for example, a friend of mine had a Jabber server. Yeah, great, but it was like on DigitalOcean. But we can't connect to it at the moment. No, we want it literally in our house, which actually this whole war thing started a whole homebrew server adventure in the country. So that was lesson number 2. And lesson number 3 is if you are in any kind of a local InfoSec community, in your town, your city, or in the capital of your country, whoever are the quote unquote leaders of that community, who are organizing the conferences, the CTFs, make sure that they are in touch with some kind of government officials. Or maybe you just invite the government officials and they get to know everyone in there already. Because it's better to have that connection than needed to not have it in times of very bad war scenarios.
I agree. Pre-establish your connections to law enforcement and government in a cybersecurity capacity beforehand. Yeah.
Yes.
Agreed.
And they are all very lovely. This is a post-Soviet country, and the stories about law enforcement in post-Soviet countries. But in times of war, it's not what the stories are. It's like everyone's very lovely. Everyone's just trying to help out. You're talking about your brothers and sisters at the border. So anything that you can do on the cyberspace can help them.
But I would also add on to that, Antranig, is to keep up with those connections. Don't just make that connection and then forget about it, because even in Rhode Island, and Larry can attest to this, right? Working with various law enforcement agencies, local to Rhode Island or even federally, the players change, right? Who has responsibility for what changes, and your points of contact change. My point of contact 20 years ago is, very antiquated communications and response process than what exists today, certainly. And that changed even, I think probably a year or two after I met the person who was a representative of the Secret Service that was handling a lot of cyber crimes. That very quickly changed, and that changes all the time. So I think it's important to keep up those connections and communications.
Yes. Yeah. I think minimum.
Jeff?
I think it's important to underscore, again, to flip it around to lessons learned for organizations. It's a really good reason for organizations to participate in, local meetups, local conferences, B-sides, and things like that.
Yep.
It's a two-way communication, and to flip this analogy around, what a great reason to get involved, volunteering or sponsoring or participating in the local meetups and conferences, just in case.
Yeah, agree. Even a few years ago, there was an example of that. There was, I think Larry and I probably have numerous examples, but there's a Rhode Island, local government agency under attack, and whoever's involved with the response to that, with local government law enforcement, knows they can pick up the phone and call Paul. They can call Larry, and we just, if anything, we're full of free advice.
Yeah.
Right?
Sometimes it's gone the other way.
Sometimes we discover it and they have to know who to call on the other side as well. Yes, that was the other incident I was thinking in the back of my head.
Yep. I've had two of those.
Yeah, I don't want to disclose any details on those, but it speaks to your point, Antranig, of being part of the community and staying part of that community. And it's a two-way street, as Larry pointed out. Yeah.
Yeah, and like the bare minimum that you can do is invite them to your B-sides, to your security conferences, and one of the things that we love very much over the years is, the government has their own software for pension funds and social security and stuff like that. And when we're running CTFs, we always ask them do you want us to put the test server of yours in part of the CTF? Maybe that would be very useful. Maybe you just had a major software update and you want to test it, right? So the law enforcement government agency and CTF community has been very productive here. We've found bugs in all of these scenarios, and they fix them very fast, because not just that there is a bug exists, but we know how to hack it, and we also know now how to fix it. So the process just goes faster.
But also important too that they're attending the conference and watching presentations, and so-and-so gave a presentation on bot detection, and the next week they're like, I really need to talk with someone that's an expert in bot detection. Oh, I saw that person give a talk. Let me just call them. And believe me, as all of us can attest to, if you've just given a talk on a topic and someone calls you up and asks you a question, you're actually excited to answer that question, right? Based on the work that you put in for that talk. So
that happens to me, almost every month. Someone from the government would call me and be like, hey, we have free BSD with ZFS. It's called FreeNAS. Do you know how to solve this issue? I'm like, absolutely would love to help you out.
Yeah, knowing where your experts are and your expertise lies, I think, is one thing we've underscored in this segment that's important to incident response.
It's also weird to say about once a month the government calls me.
Yes.
Usually they're not asking for advice.
More than once, because someone's coming to Paul, law enforcement is here. I'm like, oh, cool. They're just here to hang out, ask a question or whatever, right? So it's good.
So, yeah. And the outcome of all of this from a political point of view, I mean, we technically, lost the war, in the sense that, we lost land, as you would say, so that was very sad. From a human point of view, from both sides, many people have died. I've lost my nephew, I've lost relatives, very close friends, students of mine, who were in the army, and it was very sad on that point. Although I have to say, from a moral point of view, and Paul, I'm sure you can assure to this, as Armenians, we've seen genocide in the 20th century, we're seeing war here. From a moral point of view, we're like, we're happy we have a country and we still exist. That's the mentality that we have here. It's not, Although it's not very happy right now. I mean, right now in Karabakh, in the Republic there, it's completely landlocked, and 120,000 people are without food and water and electricity. That's been going on for like 100 days at this point, so including 30,000 children. So that's been very sad this year, and we're trying our best to donate money and food and everything, at least to find a way to bring all of that there. The UN Council just came last week here to see what's happening, and that's been very sad. But from a cyber outcome, go on.
I will say that I've gotten a report from some family of mine that's there now. Not in Karabakh, but in Yerevan and surrounding countryside. And they were telling me that the children in Karabakh, the babies, are being given tea because the mothers are starving so much they don't have milk.
Yes, that's absolutely terrifying. That's
starving.
But the frustrating thing too is, like, no one's really talking about this, right? No one talks about. And the other frightening thing is not just in Armenia as well. I mean, obviously it's near and dear to my heart being Armenian, but and Josh as well has family there, but this kind of stuff happens all across the world, all the time, and doesn't necessarily get the attention that it deserves.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I grew up in multiple wars, the 90s, and then the Syrian, and then here, and like no child should ever suffer because of politics. This is a very, very sad topic. And from a cyber perspective, it actually got better. To my surprise. So all of these coding institutions that would be like, 9 months boot camps, they added cybersecurity in their syllabus. Things from like basic end mapping to doing SQL injections to doing some basic pen testing. Universities started teaching more about cybersecurity, at least like, what is the CIA model, and, things like authentication, all of that. And that knowledge got more wide. And from the government perspective, we finally have an official government cert, right? As in, cert.gov.am, and if there's any phishings or attacks happening on government agencies or at government agencies that we as a community detect, we can report that to the government. Now there's like an actual point of contact that's responsible for all of the cyber things at the executive branch of the government. And it moved a lot forward since the war. And I can see this on a daily basis because we organize CTFs, and for the first couple of years, we didn't see any new faces coming to the CTFs. It was always the same
but
people.
Now you do. So it seems like it jump started even more. Not that there was like an initial jump start, I believe, in cybersecurity in Armenia when we first started talking years ago. But then this conflict and the response to that made a huge jump start in cybersecurity in Armenia. And there's still a lot of really cool initiatives going on. Before the show we were talking about Chris and Mari, and they're doing
organizing B-sides,
and things like that. So that's one of the positive things, is there's a increased focus and attention and effort into cybersecurity in Armenia, which is awesome.
Hey, I think I can speak for all of us. We have a pretty loyal and active audience. If you can get us any links to any relief organizations, any way that all of us that are listening can help out, we will make sure to get it into the show notes. If you know them off the top of your head, send them. Go ahead and speak them, but we can definitely get them in writing.
Send them to me, Antranig. I'll make sure they get in the show notes, and I'll put them on my social media and things like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is called the 120K project. It's 120kproject.com. This is the relief project for the 120,000 people who have been for blockade for 7 months. It's a major project going on. From the awareness point of view, what we're doing is, every Armenian is trying to join the organization on LinkedIn as like an employee, just to make it the number one organization that has employees, because 10 million Armenians, that's if there was an organization with 10 million registering 10 million employees, it would definitely boom on social media, and they're doing a lot of movement in there for donations and everything like that. So there is the project of that's 120k project.com, and in there's also links on how to donate money, etc., etc. So there are a lot of similar projects going on as well, and I will definitely send more links. We've had a lot of things happening since the war, and right now for the last 7 months as well. It's been very sad.
And everybody listening, repeat after me: Ich bin ein Armenian. Let's get involved.
Absolutely.
It's sad times, but morale is never down. We've seen worse than this. It's fine. It's fine.
Antranig, I just want to thank you and all the volunteers, for your efforts as well, and thank you for coming on the show and sharing your story, about this. And I think, despite some of the down things we talked about, the message is extremely positive in terms of lessons learned and stuff like that. I definitely got some interesting perspectives on incident response, from your story. So, and as always, it's good seeing you, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. And I would also love to thank all the, hundreds of volunteers, both on the cyber and, people who volunteered in, putting clothes and putting food to send and sewing stuff for soldiers and helping the government to literally move stuff. It was a very tough time, but as a group of people, you do the best that you can to survive over thousands of years. And Paul, it's always awesome to be here. I promise you I'll be back with way more stories.
Sounds great. Antranig, thank you so much.
Thank you.
With that, we'll take a short break, come back with the security news. Stay tuned.